Buenas tardes. I'm going to do this in English. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. It's a pleasure to welcome Miguel Fraga, who's the first secretary of the Embassy of the Republic of Cuba in the U.S. And as you know, Pete has a long-standing relationship with Cuba, a long history of programs and collaboration. So it's a great pleasure to have you here. We're very fascinated and look forward to your talk. I think that I'm going to sit over there because so I can hear, but we'll start.
Thank you so much.
One thing to remember too, I'm sorry, our logistic, there's an exit out the back as well. It's very funny when you're doing. So if you need to leave early, there's a.
Please. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm a little tired because yesterday I was in Penn University, today I was in Duquesne, and now here. But it's always a great opportunity to have this, to talk about Cuba and United States relations. I really believe that the majority of the American people wants to have normal relations with Cuba. We really believe it's good for both sides, not only for Cuba, it's also good for the United States. And now, my idea is to do this presentation. I always say I'm sorry for my English, probably I need to improve a little, but this is a good opportunity to practice. And I know that Cubans are famous for long speeches, but don't worry, I promise to be brief. And at the end, if you have any questions, people believe that as a diplomat you are expert in everything. So they want to know about culture, sports, academic. So I will do my best. If I don't have the answer, I probably can send the information after to you. So this is a presentation. This is the university number 21 that I have been able to do this presentation. And you can see this is a Washington Memorial in DC, but this is Jose Marti Memorial in Havana. I don't know if you know that Jose Marti is our national hero, and you can see how similar both memorials are, and you can see that we have the same colors in the flag, and this is because we share a lot of history. We are neighbors, we cannot change that. So let's talk about Cuba and the United States. I always use these opening questions to start a presentation, and the first is, what do you know about Cuba? I really believe it's very important to ask this. Every time I have the opportunity to ask to people, what do you know about Cuba, I have different answers. But the idea is that the majority say, okay, Cuba is famous because cigars, it's famous because rum, it's famous because Castro. But besides that, people don't have real information about Cuba. And the problem is that in the majority of the case, I really believe that there is not enough information about Cuba. There is a lot of misinformation about Cuba. So people remember Bay of Pigs, people remember the missing crisis, but I remember I did this question in one university, and this one student told me, okay, I know about Cuba. And I say, what do you know about Cuba? And he told me, I know I love Lucy. You remember the TV series show back from the 50s? And I say, wow, Cuba is not Ricky Ricardo. And you missed the last 50 years. So, but unfortunately, it's like that. You know, what you read in the media is always bad about Cuba. Cuba is the worst country in the world, and people don't know what is the real Cuba. So, for that reason, my question number 2, would you like to visit Cuba? You can raise your hand. How many of you? Okay, you see? Good support. That always is the same. The majority of people want to go to Cuba. And number 3, do you consider that Cuba and the United States can have normal relations? The real question is, why not? Why we cannot have normal relations between Cuba and the United States? Oh, because we are communists. The United States has wonderful relations with countries that are communists. How many soldiers do you lose in Vietnam? And you have wonderful trade relations with Vietnam. So why not with Cuba? Because we only have one political party. The United States has relations with countries that don't allow political parties. So there is not a real excuse to not have normal relations between Cuba and the United States. So, have you been in Cuba? How many of you? You raise your hands. And you can see that is the problem. The majority of people wants to go, but the majority of the people have not been able to travel to Cuba. And this is very interesting because as Americans you can go wherever you want. But in order to go to Cuba, you need a license. Why? Cuba is the only country that you need a license to visit. And it's prohibited by law to go as a tourist. Why? We are so bad, we are so a big threat to the United States that you are not able to travel to Cuba? So, and remember, with all this misinformation about Cuba and with people that are not able to travel there, it's difficult to have information about Cuba. And this is for the end. Do you consider that Cuba received fair treatment in the media? Well, if at the end of this presentation you already knew everything that I'm going to show today, and you read it in the American media, it's because we received fair treatment, but I don't think so. Let's start. What is Cuba? Well, I start with this question. Why the Cuban Revolution? Why we did the revolution in 1959? I believe, this is a quote, I believe there is no country in the world, including any and all the countries under colonial domination, where economic colonization, humiliation, and exploitation were worse than in Cuba. In part owing to my country's policy during the Batista regime. Batista was the former president of Cuba, the former dictator of Cuba. I approved the proclamation with Fidel Castro made in the Sierra Maestra when he justified call for justice and especially yearning to right Cuba of corruption. I will even go further to some extent. It has told Batista was the incarnation of a number of sins on the part of the United States. Now we should have to pay for those sins. In the model of the Batista regime and in agreement with the first Cuban revolutionaries. That is perfectly clear. Do you know who said that? Do you have any idea? Well, the majority of people don't know who said that. And it's interesting because the majority of people that comes here is because they want to know more, and sometimes they read and they do research about Cuba. Well, this was October 24, 1963, I was President Kennedy. Yeah. It's interesting, you know, because this was the man that approved Bay of Pigs. And I always say, I really believe that since the Bay of Pigs, we avoided a nuclear disaster during the business crisis in 1962. And this is 1963, 1 month before he was shot in Dallas. So, some people say that at this point he was trying to improve the relation with Cuba, he was trying to normalize the relation with Cuba. And remember, President Eisenhower cut the relations with Cuba, the diplomatic relations, 17 days before President Kennedy took office. And the plan for the idea for the invasion of Bay of Pigs was already ready, and he approved that. But anybody say to President Kennedy, it's going to be easy. We're going to have the support of the Cuban people. That doesn't happen. So I think it's important to read what President Kennedy said about why we did the revolution. And when we talk about corruption, I always say to the students and to the people, if you want to know what was Cuba before 1959, you need to see The Godfather, second part. Do you remember the movie? It was not a family, the Corleone family, but it was real that the mafia was in Cuba trying to create a new Las Vegas because Cuba was so corrupted. And if you want to see the Golden Phone, you need to go to the Museum of the Revolution. We have the Golden Phone there. That was true. That was a true history. So that was Cuba before 1959. So, what is Cuba? Well, we are 11 million people. We are smaller than Pennsylvania. So the big threat, the country that you cannot visit, is smaller than your state, the state of Pennsylvania. Our GDP is $77 billion, and all the majority of the numbers I'm going to show today are from the World Bank. So it's not Cuban sources. You can check it online, and I always say, if you don't believe me, go to Cuba. So our GDP is number 67 in 195 countries, according to the World Bank again. Our labor force is 5 million people, and look at this number. Almost 10% of that labor force is right now in the private sector. That is a huge change in Cuba. And our per capita income is more than $6,000 in 2013. That is the last number that the World Bank has. But look at this. Life expectancy, 79 years old. Births attended by skilled health staff, 100%. Mortality rate, 4 children per 1,000 live birth. Immunization, 99% of our children receive all the vaccines for free. The 1% that don't receive the vaccine is because of religious reasons. They don't want, and we respect that. We have 6.7 doctors per 1,000 people in Cuba. According to the World Health Organization, 44% of the member states report less than one. For that reason, we have doctors everywhere. And 100% of the Cuban people know how to read and write, and goes all the way through the university because it's for free. But according to the United Nations, more than 700 million of people right now don't know how to read and write. 95% have access to improved water sources, and 93% have access to improved sanitation facilities. I always say at this point, remember our GDP, because it's not fair to compare Cuba with the countries of the G7. But even when you compare Cuba with these numbers, you're going to see that we are proud of many things. And I always say, I don't come here and say that we are perfect. No, we have many things to change. But for that, it's something that the Cubans need to support. And I come here to say that we are proud of this, and we can work together to improve many things if we work together, Cuba and the United States. According to the World Bank, we spent 12.8% of our GDP on education. In 2010, that was the highest investment in education worldwide. We spent 8% of our GDP on health. And this is from our sources. To health and education is allocated 51% of total expenditure of 2017 budget activity. So we know what are our priorities. To military expenditure, we only spend 3.5% of our GDP. And according to the World Bank, we are considered a upper middle income country. So when people come and say, how do you live with $20 per month? I say, well, first, your $20 are not our $20. And we have many things in Cuba that, again, are a society with equal opportunities for everybody, with social justice, and of course we want to improve, but you don't see extreme poverty in Cuba, you don't see children on the street, you don't see things that you see in other countries, unfortunately, in the world. According to the United Nations, Cuba is 67 out of 188 countries in the Human Development Index 2015, and is a country in the group of the high human development countries of the world. Oh, sports. You know that Cuba loves sports. And this is in the Olympics. You know how expensive sports are. And we have right now 220 Olympic medals and 77 gold medals. A lot of that in boxing. And before the Cuban Revolution, only we have, I believe, like 9 or 10 medals. So all the rest are after the revolution, because we try to support the sports in our country. Baseball. I know I was invited to a presentation in New York to talk about baseball, and I put this because I think it's interesting. We have 199 players born in Cuba that has played in Major League Baseball. The first one was in 1871. 1871. So it's nothing new to have good ball players here in the United States. And in 2016, on opening day, Cuba was number 3 with 18 players born outside the US. In the Hall of Fame, with the 3 new members of the Hall of Fame that you're going to have this year, you're going to have 315 members. Only 10 are Latinos, 4 are Cubans. So you see, Cubans are almost everywhere. But the problem is, let's talk about politics because it's important, that the Cubans are the only one that have to defend in order to play in Major League Baseball. Because the embargo is in place. If a Cuban player wants to come to the United States to play, they have to sign one letter and say, I'm going to Cuba and I'm going to bring money back to Cuba. And look at this, since 2010, big league teams have signed at least 25 Cuban players to Major League contracts worth at least $1 million for a grand total of $645 million. That money doesn't go to Cuba. That money stays here in the United States. And right now we have this bill in Congress, and we have the same bill in the last Congress. Is a congressman from New York, Serrano, and he only asked for the Cuban players to have the opportunity to come here, play, and go back to Cuba with their money. And if that happens, probably we're going to have more Cuban players here in the United States. I love Twitter, you know. Twitter is a challenge. You have to put all your ideas in 140 characters. So I try to take ideas from Twitter. And this is from NASA. Last year, in January, they put this tweet: "Happy birthday to Arnaldo Tamayo Mendes of Cuba, first Latin American and first person of African ancestry in the space." Was a Cuban. But this was the World Health Organization. Cuba is the first country in the world to receive validation for eliminating mother-to-child transmission of HIV and syphilis. But this is WWF. Cuba is the only country in the world today that meets the criteria for sustainable development. And this is from the UNICEF. Cuba has eliminated severe child malnutrition. It's the only country, I believe, in Latin America that can say this. So again, when you read things about Cuba and you have the idea that Cuba is a failed state, how can you talk about all this? How can you present all this information? Why do you don't put this information to the American people to know that Cuba is not a failed state? That Cuba is a country, again, that has many things to change, but it's a country that is proud to show to the world many of the things that they have. And for that reason, the majority of Cubans supported the system that we have in our country right now. Internet. This started in Seattle. People say, why do you have internet? I say, well, we have internet. But the problem is that for many years we didn't have the opportunity to connect to the cables that surround the island, and for many years was not a priority, but we want internet, and we start internet at the universities for free for the students. Was slow, a very bad connection. Right now it's still slow and it's expensive, but we open internet, and right now we have 200 Wi-Fi zones in Cuba. And you go to Cuba right now, you're going to see a lot of young people doing Facebook, doing Twitter, like everybody else. And it's, again, it's expensive and it's slow. According to our numbers, almost 250,000 Cubans use internet daily in Wi-Fi zones. So not in the schools, not in the works, no, in Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi zones. But the problem is not Cuba. If you go to the United Nations, you're going to see that only 43.3% of the human population has access to internet. So why do you put your eye on Cuba if the majority of the people of the world don't have internet? By the way, this is your journalist in Cuba from CNN, and in October he put this tweet: trying to watch a Susan Rice, Ambassador Susan Rice, webcast on loosening of Cuban restrictions, but getting a prohibited location error message. That was funny to read, and I replied to him, and I say, this proves at least three things. The embargo is still in place. There is internet in Cuba, and it's limited by the same embargo. He don't say nothing to me. But my ambassador also replied to me, and he said, yes, ambassador, because when you read that, you don't know why. And the problem was the embargo. For that reason, he cannot follow the broadcasting live in Cuba. But we have internet in Cuba. We are doing business with everybody. Those are our key trading partners. You can see in exports, Venezuela, Canada, Netherlands, and China. Imports, Venezuela, China, Spain, and Brazil. So when people ask to us, how is to do business, how can I do business with Cuba, how is to do business with Cuba, I say, ask to the Canadians. Because we have relations with all the countries in the world. Of course, all the countries suffer the same embargo. And it's difficult to do business with Cuba, but we have relations with almost every country, and we have trade. Cuba is not isolated anymore. Cuba has diplomatic relations with 191 countries, orders, and institutions, 180 of the 193 United Nations member states. We have 114 foreign diplomatic missions in Cuba, and we have 122 Cuban embassies and missions abroad. When you compare that, you're going to see that it's a huge number. Some countries don't have that number of embassies at home or those embassies abroad. Of course, a Cuban embassy sometimes is a house with a Cuban flag and two people inside working hard. We don't need a big budget. Don't worry, here in the United States we have more than two people, and we are working hard. But that is the idea. And also we believe in international cooperation, and for that reason Cuba, again, is not isolated and is very well respected, have the respect of many people around the world. And this is one of the reasons. More than 300 people, 300,000 collaborators have provided service in 158 countries in all these 50 years. So we are talking about teachers, we are talking about doctors, we are talking about healthcare workers. And right now we have more than 50,000 Cuban healthcare workers providing service in 65 nations. Half of those people are doctors providing service in 65 nations. And I always use this because I say, when people say to me that we send doctors to Venezuela because of the oil, I always say, why we send doctors to Haiti? Why we send doctors to Africa? No, we believe in international cooperation, and we have been working with all the countries that is possible. Of course, our resources are not what we want, and sometimes we cannot provide more. And thanks to the Yes I Can educational program, was a program that Cuba created, almost 10 million people have left illiteracy behind in 30 different countries. More than 68,000 students from 157 countries have graduated in Cuba. So every time that you go to some place, you find people that come and say, thanks. My father will become a doctor or become an engineer in Cuba. Where are you from? Oh, I'm from Nigeria. I'm from many countries in the world. You can see 157. And we have this school in Havana. It's the Latin American School for Medicine. And it started as a project only for Latin America. But right now you can see that we have a student from 117 countries. And more than 25,000 medical graduated from 84 countries. Some of them are from the United States. The only thing that we ask to these people is, after you graduated, go back to your community and do your work there. Is the only thing that we ask. So I use this because 2 years ago when I came in 2015, you commemorate the 10th anniversary of the Katrina. This was an editorial from the New York Times. For the first time, you can read this in the New York Times. And they say, Cuba has a long tradition of dispatching doctors and nurses to disaster areas abroad. In the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in 2005, the Cuban government created a quick reaction medical corps and offered to send doctors to New Orleans. The United States, surprisingly, didn't take Havana up on that offer. At that time, the United States said, okay, this is politics, they're not coming because... And we offered 1,000 doctors. Unfortunately, after that, we had the earthquake in Pakistan. Pakistan asked for help, and we sent the doctors to Pakistan. And I put this in my Twitter. I put what President Fidel Castro, probably you cannot read it, I'm going to read it for you. What Fidel Castro, former president of Cuba, said at that time: there is nothing strange about the behavior of Cuba, which did not hesitate to offer the people of the United States the immediate dispatch of emergency doctors with the essential resources needed to administer emergency care to people in mortal danger. So we offered that. We offered the same when September 11th, we offered our airspace, we offered our airport, and we have been working with all the countries. But let's go to U.S.-Cuba relations. December the 17th, everything changed. Breaking news. President Obama and President Raul announced to the world that they are ready to start a new relation between Cuba and the United States. You can see there the Cuban national newspaper, Grama, and you can see that we publish both speeches, President Raul and President Obama, a speech in Spanish for all the people. I tried to find the same here in the United States, and you have a lot of newspapers. So far, I didn't find any newspaper that published the speech of President Raul. And by the way, this is the New York Times, and you can see Fidel Castro, not even Raul Castro on the front page. So it's part of this that is so difficult. But the idea was that December the 17th proved that the only thing that you need is will. Nothing bad happened. We are still here. You know, after everything that happened, we are still here. So, but why this happened? Well, I have been told that here in the United States you love polls, and you always want to see what people think about something. Well, according to all polls, American polls, the majority of the Americans want better relations with Cuba before and after December 17. And you can see, for example, that also the majority of the Cuban Americans, and this is from Florida International University, in June 2014, so before December 17, this poll shows that 68% of Cuban Americans in Miami-Dade County. Why Miami-Dade County? Well, we have 2 million of Cuban Americans living here. 1.2 million live in Florida, and the majority are in Miami-Dade County. Support normalizing relations with Cuba. 71% expressed the view that the embargo was not working at all or not very well. The Washington Post, after December the 17th, 68% of Americans support ending the trade embargo, and 74% support ending the travel restriction. So, I'm going to talk about more polls, but I don't want to take too much of the time. We start negotiations between Cuba and the United States. The good news, we have women in charge. Sometimes it's better. We have the first meeting in April during the Summit of the Americas. We have the first meeting of the U.S. Secretary of State and the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Cuba. And also we have this moment, the first official meeting between Raúl Castro and President Obama, U.S. President and Cuban President. What happened? Nothing bad happened. We are still here. We opened our embassy here in Washington in July, and you opened your embassy in Havana in August. We reestablished diplomatic relations. We have another meeting between both presidents in New York. And again, another important moment. The United States removed Cuba from the list of sponsors of terrorism, state sponsor of terrorism. So right now you are not listening to the terrorists. But Cuba was in the list since the 80s. Nevertheless, there is not a single evidence that Cuba committed any crime against the United States or any terrorist action in U.S. soil. We know how important terrorism is for the United States. I have been able to visit New York, to visit Fort Arlington, the Pentagon, and also I was able to visit the place for the Flight 93. And I know how important is again terrorism for the American people. But you know what? We commemorate September 11 before you. On September 11, 1980, a Cuban diplomat was killed in New York. A Cuban diplomat that represented Cuba in the United Nations was killed in New York streets by people that was against the relation between Cuba and the United States. Probably you don't read that, but that September 11 for us is a day that we commemorate before the United States. And we know what it means to use a plane to do terrorist action, because in October 6, 1966, again, terrorists put a bomb in a civil plane and killed 73 people, the majority of them from Cuba, and the plane was a Cuban plane. One of the master mind behind this is still free in Miami, unfortunately. So we know what is that. But again, there is not a single evidence that we commit any crime against the United States. But you know what? I want to show you right now, and of course you can find information. I can show you right now this secret memo from the CIA that is right now on the internet, and you can see that in 1987 there is a secret memorandum from the Secretary of State showed to President Reagan when they say that former dictator of Chile, Augusto Pinochet, personally ordered to put a bomb to a car in Washington, D.C. to kill the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of President Allende. But they killed not only the former minister, they also killed a U.S. citizen, Ronnie Murphy, in D.C. And look at this, what Secretary of State Schultz wrote to President Reagan. Nevertheless, this is a blatant example of a chief of state direct involvement in an act of state terrorism, one that is particularly disturbing both because it's securing our capital and since its government is generally considered to be friendly. So every time that I heard that Cuba is a dictatorship, I say, well, you need to ask the people of Chile what was Pinochet. You need to ask the people of Nicaragua what was Somoza, or you need to ask the people of Cuba what was Batista. And I don't remember any embargo, any U.S. embargo against Chile, against Nicaragua, against Cuba, And I don't remember to see Chile in the list of the state sponsor of terrorism. So, of course, you know the place and you know your former president. The other person is my ambassador, Jose Ramon Cabañas. For the first time since 1959, a Cuban ambassador presents credentials to the President of the United States. Another historic moment. That is our embassy in D.C. is in 16th Street. It's 100 years old, the building. And according to the authorities of D.C., we are the oldest building as an embassy in D.C. Because the one that opened before changed the location to Massachusetts Avenue, which is right now the Embassy Road. But we still are in 16th Street. That was the man, one of the first men that came as a representative of Cuba and the man behind the construction of the embassy. And this was the first Cuban ambassador with that title, ambassador, that was between 1923 and 1925. Sorry, more polls. But you can see how, even when we do progress, we have the support of the majority of people. This is a poll from the Atlantic Council, and you can see Iowa, Indiana, Ohio, and Tennessee. And according to this poll, 70% of people believe that the United States is in the wrong track. But that same people support in 68% the ties with Cuba. I don't have the number for Pennsylvania, sorry. Probably we need to do something. And this is Gallup. For the first time since 1996, the majority of the people, 54%, have a positive, a good opinion about Cuba. And I always say, remember, it's the people that don't know what is the real Cuba. That the only thing that they read is bad things about Cuba. But for the first time, we have the majority of people with a good opinion about Cuba. Okay. In the last year and in the last 2 years, we had 5 members of the cabinet in Cuba: the Secretary of State, Secretary of Commerce, Agriculture, Transportation, and the Secretary of Health. We have 10 senators and 43 members of the House. We have 7 governors: Governor of New York, Governor of Arkansas, Texas, Virginia, Missouri, Louisiana, and the last one was the governor, of Virginia. Again, members of both parties, and you can read what they say after they visit Cuba. They say we have opportunities in Cuba, it's good for both countries. So, we are talking with the United States about everything. We are talking about the environment, we are talking about law enforcement and counter narcotics. We are talking about mail, because it was prohibited, we didn't have the opportunity to send mail between Cuba and the United States. Now we have an agreement about that. We are talking about claims, because people say, okay, the problem with Cuba is that Cuba took all the properties of the United States and didn't pay for that. Well, we pay to another countries. We have agreements with Canada, with Great Britain, with France, with Spain, with Switzerland. The problem was that the United States was never had the will to sit down and talk about this issue. We are talking about human rights. We are talking about global health. For the first time in more than 50 years, Cuba and the United States work together in Africa against the Ebola epidemic. We provide the doctors, the United States provides some of the facilities, some of the resources, and we succeed. We stop the epidemic. We are talking about travel, we are talking about commerce, we are talking about internet and telecommunications, we are talking about security of trade and travel flow, and of course we talk about the Colombia stalls, because I'm sure that you're aware that Cuba was the host for the conversations between the government of Colombia and also the guerrilla. And the agreement was signed in Cuba. We create a bilateral commission to talk about all the issues, and since the reestablishment of relations, so since July 2015, we already signed 22 bilateral agreements in many of these issues: environment, mail, commerce, travel, etc.
Might I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Immigration isn't on your list.
Sorry?
Immigration isn't on your list?
I believe it's part of the security of trade and travel flow. I believe it's part of that. And it's one of the last agreements that we signed, by the way. 19 high-level visits, 13 from the US and 6 from Cuba, and 42 technical meetings and cooperation activities. I say to many people, the problem is for many years we didn't have the opportunity to talk. So we didn't know how to approach to each other. So for the first time, we have people in both sides of the table learning from each other how to do things, and how to do things with the embargo. Remember that, because the embargo is still in place, and that is something that I want to stress right now. That is my ambassador last year during our National Day, and he tried to explain why we don't have normal relations. We reestablished diplomatic relations, but we don't have normal relations between Cuba and the United States. And this is the reason. In Cuba, we believe that bilateral relations with the United States will be normal only when we exercise full sovereignty on all our territory, when we are no longer under the sanction regime, and when no specific programs are funded to alter our way of life. I'll try to explain that. What is the so-called embargo? Everybody say, okay, embargo. What is the embargo? Let me try to explain this, and you can find this is a secret, was a secret memo from the Department of State. You can find that memo right now in the Foreign Relations of the United States from between 1958 and 1960. That was published in 1991. And this is a memorandum from the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Inter-American Affairs to the Assistant Secretary of State for Inter-American Affairs. And this is 1960. Look at this. Number one, the majority of Cubans support Castro. The lowest estimate I have seen is 50%. I don't know you, but 50% is half of the people. There is not effective political opposition. Interesting. So, I remember, this is secret. So what they want to do in this country, in Cuba, they say, and you can read the last two lines, we need to deny money and supplies to Cuba to decrease monetary and real wage, to bring about hunger, desperation, and overthrow of the government. So, a government that at least has 50% of support, a country that don't have political opposition, and you want to create hunger, desperation, and overthrow of the government. So that was the idea behind the embargo. And the idea behind the embargo was the idea to deny money and supplies to Cuba, to decrease monetary and real wages. That was the official policy of the United States for all this year. But you know what, and this is the link to the history of the State Department, and you can find the document. But you know what, the embargo is not anymore a bilateral issue between Cuba and the United States. For the last 25 years, Cuba introduced in the United Nations a resolution asking to lift the embargo, and we have all this year more countries that support that resolution, and last year we had 191 votes in favor, out of 193. So when people say to me, wow, the problem with the United Nations is you never have agreement in anything, I say, look to the embargo. 191 out of 193. The only countries that voted against was the United States and Israel. And last year, they didn't vote again. They voted in abstention. So you can say right now that any country in the world supports the embargo. And remember, this is what the embargo cost to Cuba. 4.6 billion last year. This is money that we have to pay because of embargo. Because sometimes people know that the embargo is in place, that we cannot buy things here, or we have to transport things from countries too far, and we have to pay more. So that's what the embargo cost, 4.6 billion in the only in the last year. But look at this number. Only for health, the embargo cost Cuba $82 million. For education, 1.2 million. And for culture and sport, 29 million. And for those who say, well, but you are in a new moment, okay, since December the 17th, the U.S. government has fined 11 entities for doing business with Cuba, for breaking the embargo. The embargo is in place. 7 are Americans and 4 are foreigners. And you can see how much they pay for the embargo. And if you want to see the names of the entities, you can go to the Department of Treasury, to the Office of Foreign Asset Control, and you can see the list of all the entities. I can put you one example. The bank in Canada, the Toronto, the TD, was the last one that has to pay a fine for doing business with Cuba. So it's difficult for Cuba to improve the economic situation. This is President Barack Obama in the last State of the Union speech last year. Look what he said. 50 years of isolating Cuba has failed to promote democracy and set us back in Latin America. That is why we restore diplomatic relations. Applause. You don't have to. That is what's happening in the House. Opening the door to travel and commerce, positioning ourselves to improve the life of the Cuban people. Applause. So if you want to consolidate our leadership and credibility in the hemisphere, recognize that the Cold War is over. Leave the embargo. So let's do this. The majority of the Americans don't want the embargo. The majority of the Cuban Americans don't want the embargo. Any country in the world supports the embargo. Your former president don't want the embargo. Why the embargo is still in place? The people that defend the embargo, who they represent? That is something that I want people to think about, you know. Another issue, Guantanamo. Guantanamo is not only the prison. Guantanamo is the base that you have in Cuba. And the United States has leased Guantanamo Bay from Cuba since 1903. And of course, you have to go back in history, and the land belongs to Cuba, but the original agreement based on the Black Amendment gives the United States complete jurisdiction and control over the base. Again, you need to go to the Spanish-American War. The war was not in Spain, or was not in the United States, but it's the Spanish-American War. And after that, the United States occupied Cuba. And under that occupation, the Cubans wrote our first constitution. But what happened? The governor of Cuba, a U.S. member of the military, called the people that was writing the constitution and said, if you don't approve the Black Amendment as part of the constitution, you're not going to have a republic. So the Black Amendment, you can read it. It's only 7 articles. Give full control to the United States of Cuba. We were not an independent country because of the Black Amendment. And this was the senator behind that, by the way, Senator Bill Platt from Connecticut. And another agreement in 1934 gave the United States the use of Guantanamo in perpetuity. What that means is forever. Unless the United States unilaterally abandoned the base of both the U.S. and Cuba agreed to end the lease. The space that you have in Guantanamo is 2 times the territory of Manhattan. You know how much do you pay for that? $4,085 per year. Somebody told me, probably that is the rent of one apartment, 1 month in Manhattan. But this is not about money. We don't collect the check. We only did one time, it was a mistake, but we don't collect the check and we don't want the base. And by the way, if you read what people said about the base, people who knows, they are going to say to you that the base is not strategic to the United States. It costs a lot of money to have the base in Cuba. Another issue, and this is probably to answer the question why some people defend the embargo. The embargo is a way of life for some people. Between 1996 and 2014, Congress appropriated some $264 million in funding for Cuban democracy efforts. So you're not sending money to build a hospital in Cuba, to build a school in Cuba. You're sending money to Cuba to create democracy in our country. And I don't know if you know what is Radio Martí, TV Martí, and Martí Noticias. In the 80s, you created a radio station to broadcast propaganda against Cuba. In the 90s, you created a TV station, and now you have, of course, a website. And you use the name of our national hero. Imagine we created Radio Washington to broadcast propaganda against the United States. Well, you have been doing this for the last 30 years. And according to this congresswoman from Minnesota, Betty McCollum, that cost to you in the last 30 years more than $700 million. So the people that receive that money are going to defend Radio Martí and TV Martí. But let me tell you, you are losing money because in Cuba nobody sees this. And last year was $27 million in 2015. So we need Congress to change the relation with Cuba, not only the president, and for that reason we have some bills in the last Congress. The best bill that we have was in the Senate, S-299, Freedom to Travel to Cuba, and we had 53 senators that co-sponsored the bill. And this is interesting because we always say this is not a concession to Cuba. This is about your freedom. Why you are not able to travel to Cuba tomorrow if you want? Why do you need a license to go to Cuba? Of course, we have another bills for agricultural export, for freedom to export, because again, it's good for both sides. It's not only good for Cuba. And we already in the 115th Congress, we have one bill in the House for freedom to travel, H.R. 351, and several bills for trade. One of them is 442. And let me show you why we say it's good for both sides. According to the United Nations, and this is from the Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, according to the United Nations, Cuba buys 70 to 80% of our food abroad. We are talking about $2 billion every year. We buy that amount of food. But because it's prohibited by law here in the United States to give credits to Cuba to buy agricultural products, in 2014 we buy in the United States 300 million. And in other countries we buy $1.8 billion. So we always say, your farmers are losing money and we can have the opportunity to put more food in our table. And this is something, of course, that your farmers want us to do, to sell products to Cuba. And of course, we don't have either the opportunity to do more things in the medical cooperation between Cuba and the United States. For example, numerous Cuba's innovations are helping patients worldwide, but not in the US. That is the case of this medication that is for people that suffer diabetes. You know, people who suffer diabetes, at some point, they can suffer for ulcers, and probably they have to have amputations because of the diabetes. Well, we have one medication already in 26 countries around the world, but it's not allowed to come to the United States. Thanks to President Obama, in October last year, he gave the opportunity to bring one of the Cuban medication to the United States, and for that reason we are working right now with Roswell Park Institute in New York, and we are doing trials for a cancer vaccine for lung cancer, and we already started trials in Roswell Park Institute. And in Chicago, the University of Illinois in Chicago with the support of the Chicago authorities, invite Cuban doctors to come to Chicago to try to create a program to improve the health assistance to people that don't have enough money to pay for that. So we are working with Chicago. The doctors came in January 9 this year. So we have more opportunity. And look at this. This is an organization that is in California, and they say the U.S. citizen can't travel to Cuba for medical treatment. It's not possible to provide them with service and treatment recognized worldwide. This was the visit of President Obama to Cuba. It was interesting. We gave the opportunity to President Obama to make a speech that was broadcast live to all the country. And when he said, as President of the United States, I have called on our Congress to lift the embargo, the people in the room applaud, you know, people that was in the theater when he spoke. And you can see he said it's time to lift the embargo, but he also said this, and we really believe it's important. I have made it clear that the United States has neither the capacity nor the intention to impose change on Cuba. What change comes will depend upon the Cuban people. That's the only thing that we want, to decide our own future. The last, the New York Times did a poll, and you can see that 6 in 10 Americans think restoring diplomacy with Cuba is mostly good for the U.S. That was during the visit of President Obama. Do you know when was the last president that visited Cuba? 1928, President Calvin Coolidge, the only U.S. president that visited Cuba. I always ask, is anybody here from 1928? It's difficult to find somebody from 1928. But in any case, President Obama said in Cuba, you know, the last president that visited Cuba needs 3 days to come. I only need 3 hours to come. So, again, we really believe it was a good visit. And this is, we already start breaking barriers. We have now the cruise Cuba, we have the flights to Cuba, we have United, American, Delta, JetBlue, we have Alaska Air, the first non-stop flight from Los Angeles to Havana was some days ago from Alaska Air. We have 3 hotels, by the way, 3 hotels running by a US company right now, as I mentioned. And people say, okay, are you okay with that? And they say, well, we have 20 hotels running by a Spanish company. Why not 3 hotels running by a US company? We already signed agreements with all these companies to improve the telecommunications in Cuba and also to improve the internet. We signed one agreement with Google to improve the speed of internet in Cuba. We have 2 states, Alabama and California. They passed resolutions asking to the Congress to improve the relation with Cuba. And it's very interesting because the resolution of Alabama in the Senate of Alabama said, okay, we have a trade relation with Cuba that is about $32 million per year. And they say, 32 million with the bargain. Imagine without the bargain. You see, Alabama is a Republican state, but they want better relation with Cuba. Last year we did this, the boxing on the bridge. That is another wonderful idea that proves that sometimes you don't need the government, to do something. You can start as a small citizen dreaming. Was Michael Dibble the one that say why we don't invite the boxers from Cuba to come to Pittsburgh? Everybody saying to him, "You're crazy. The Cubans are not going to come because they're going to the Olympics." But he went to Cuba and he invited the Minister of Sport, and we did it. It was a wonderful event. We broadcast live to Cuba. I believe 5-6 million of Cubans saw that event because imagine, fights between Cuba and the United States on the bridge. So it was something very symbolic, but everybody wants to see what happened, and it was a wonderful event. And now we are working to have the rematch in Cuba. Last year, 74% more Americans visited Cuba. 74% of Americans. We're talking about 284,000. And again, when people say, "You're okay?" We receive 4 million visitors in Cuba. 1 million come from Canada. Why not from the United States? And the last 2 polls, I promise. These are the last. But I think it's important. This is again Florida International University. And this is from November 2016. So 2 months ago. And you can see how the numbers changed. In 1991, the same poll find that only 14% of the Cuban American, 14% support the lifting of the US embargo. But now in 2016, the number is 63%. And if you go only to the people, the last generation between 96 and 2016, we are talking about 80% support for the relation between Cuba and the United States. And this is from Pew Research, and you can see that 75% of the American people support the establishment of diplomatic relations between Cuba and the United States, and 73% support the end of the embargo. One of the most important things that the President did with Cuba, President Obama, was this presidential policy directive. And I want to highlight 2 things. As I mentioned before, and this is from the Twitter account of the White House, they put, now Americans and Cubans can engage in joint medical research and expand humanitarian service to improve the life of the Cuban people. For that reason, we have this cancer vaccine Roswell Park Institute sends to this. But I must say that it's not only to improve the life of the Cuban people, because that vaccine is going to be used here in the United States, so it's to improve the life of the American people. And they also highlight this. Now, there are not special limits on the amount of Cuban-made goods, including alcohol and cigars, that Americans can bring back with them from Cuba for personal use. I don't know why the Roman cigar was so important, but they put it. Now you can bring all the cigars, all the run that you want. Say, wow, interesting. And of course, Ambassador Susan Rice was the one that introduced the presidential policy directive, saying the same. Now I want to be clear, the United States respects Cuban sovereignty and its right to self-determination. That's the most important. I don't know, I put this about President Kennedy because I don't know if you know the story behind the cigars in Cuba. One day President Kennedy called his press secretary and asked to his press secretary to buy all the cigars that he can. Buy all the cigars that you can. And the day after that, the press secretary comes and says, okay, President, mission accomplished, I have 1,000, I don't know how many, 1,000 something cigars. The President Kennedy said, okay. And he took and signed the bargain and say, now the cigars are not allowed in the U.S. He believed that. That is a true history. I have in Cigar Aficionado writing by the press secretary. And he believed that 1,000 were enough. History proved that it was not like that. But right now, you can bring all that you want. So, I don't want to take too much time, but I want to say that this was the official position of Cuba before the elections here in the United States. And you can see that we said, after President Obama, we hoped that whoever occupies the White House has a policy that reflects the consensus of the public opinion of the U.S. citizens, including the Cuban immigration in that country, in favor of the improvement of relations with Cuba by the wide margin. And after the election, President Raúl Castro sent a message to President-elect Donald Trump and say, congratulations for your election as President of the United States. And this is only a few days ago. This is in the Latin American and Caribbean Summit. This is part of the speech of our President Raúl Castro, and look what he said. I wish to express Cuban willingness to continue negotiation pending bilateral issues with the United States on the basis of equality, reciprocity, and respect for the sovereignty and independence of our country, and to continue the respectful dialogue and cooperation on issues of common interest with the new government of President Donald Trump. So that is our position. We are not going to close the door. We are ready, because we really believe that this is for the best of both countries. So, final question, what do you know about Cuba? I hope you have now more information about my country. Would you like to visit Cuba? I hope you have more reasons to go. I hope you have more ideas and more information to support that we can have normal relations. I cannot change number 4, probably in the future. And now, I hope you have one idea if we receive fair treatment in the media. So this is like a commercial. You don't have to pay nothing, but if you want more information, you can follow our Twitter accounts, or you can visit our Facebook page, because we are always trying to put what is happening in the bilateral relations between Cuba and the United States. This is the Twitter account of the embassy. This is in Spanish and English, and also my ambassador and myself. We are trying to put information in both languages. And this is the Pope. Probably you're aware that the Pope was very important in the relations between Cuba and the United States. He wrote letters to President Obama and President Raúl Castro. And this is the golden rule that he mentioned in Congress when he visited the United States after visiting Cuba. And he said, do unto others as you will have them do unto you. I think that is very important. So for the end, change is the law of life. And those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future. If our dreams of yesterday are today's realities, our dreams of today will be tomorrow's realities, and thus be the same for all people of the world if we are able to dream of a better future together. President Kennedy and President Fidel Castro. I would like to say that for those who want to cut the relations, they belong to the past, and they are going to miss the future. For those who want to build a better future, we can start today. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry for all the time I take.